The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the road to Ashcombe Manor had become a river of mud and broken stones. A carriage stood at the edge of the village of Millbrook, its wheels sunk deep in the wet earth. Inside sat a young woman named Vivienne Ashcombe, and she was not moving. She had been sitting still for almost an hour. The driver had gone ahead on foot to fetch help. The horses stamped and blew steam from their noses into the cold morning air. Vivienne could hear the rain on the roof of the carriage, a steady soft drumming, and the sound of water dripping from the trees onto the leather roof. She could smell wet wool from her cloak and the faint scent of old leather from the seats. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was not crying. She had stopped crying 2 days ago. In 3 weeks, she was to be married. She had never met the man. His name was Alastair Ravenhurst, the Duke of Cranford, and he had agreed to marry her because his father and her father had been friends 30 years ago and had drawn up a paper when both girls and boys were still small. The paper said that if their children were of proper age when the time came, they would be joined. Her father was dead now. Her mother was dead now. Her older brother, who managed the estate, had told her the news 3 months ago at supper, between his soup and his mutton. He had said it as if he were telling her the price of oats. Vivienne had said yes, because there was no other thing to say. A woman of 22, with no dowry beyond the paper her father had signed, did not have many choices. She had a small trunk of clothes, 3 books, and a locket that had belonged to her mother. That was all she owned in the world. Her brother had told her that she was lucky. He had said the Duke of Cranford was very rich and would probably not beat her. He had said this and then reached for the salt. She had smiled at her brother that night. She had smiled all through supper. She had gone up to her small cold room and sat on the edge of her bed for a very long time. Then she had opened her trunk and looked at what was inside. That was the night the plan began. Vivienne knew what it meant to be a rich man's wife. She had watched her aunt live that life. Her aunt had married a viscount who had chosen her for her pretty face and her good manners at table. Her aunt had spent the last 18 years of her life being pretty and being quiet. Her aunt had once, only once, told Vivienne that she wished she had been born plain. She had said it in a voice so soft that Vivienne had almost not heard it. Then her aunt had laughed and told her not to be foolish. Vivienne did not want to be chosen for her pretty face. Vivienne wanted to be chosen for something that could not be taken away from her. She wanted to know, before she said her vows before God and man, whether the Duke of Cranford would look at her when she was not pretty, whether he would speak to her kindly when he did not know she was his bride, whether he was a man who could be a home to her, or whether he was a man who could only be a house. So, she had made her plan. She had written a letter to the housekeeper at Ashcombe Manor, a woman named Mrs. Pellick, who had known her mother. She had asked Mrs. Pellick to take her in as a scullery maid for 1 month. She had explained everything. Mrs. Pellick had written back within a week. Mrs. Pellick had said yes. Mrs. Pellick had said that any daughter of Lady Ashcombe would be welcome under her roof, in whatever clothes she chose to wear. And so Vivienne sat in a broken carriage in the rain, dressed in the dress of a scullery maid, rough grey wool that scratched her neck, a cloak with a torn hem, boots that had been sold to her by the wife of a farmer for 2 shillings. Her hair was pulled back tight under a plain cap. She had rubbed a little ash on her cheek before dawn. She had rubbed dirt into her fingernails. She had bitten the inside of her cheek to make her face look tired. She had left her real trunk with Mrs. Pellick's cousin in the village. All she carried now was a small bundle wrapped in brown cloth, and her mother's locket hidden under the wool at her throat. The driver had not known who she was. She had told him she was a maid going to a new position at the manor. He had grumbled about the rain, but had taken her money. Now she sat and waited. The rain hit the roof. The horses stamped. She could smell the damp inside of the carriage and hear the soft whistle of wind through the crack in the door. She was cold. Her toes had gone numb inside the borrowed boots. She thought about her mother, who had died when Vivienne was 12. Her mother had smelled of lavender and warm bread. Her mother had once told her that the only thing a woman truly owned was her own heart, and that she must never give it away to a man who had not earned it. Vivienne meant to make him earn it, or to leave quietly before the vows were said and go and find work as a governess in the North Country. She had that plan ready too. There was a sound outside. Not the driver's footsteps. A horse. A single horse coming slowly down the road, its hooves making a wet, heavy sound in the mud. Vivienne pulled her cloak tighter and lowered her head under her cap. She did not know why. Some instinct told her to be small. The horse stopped near the carriage. A man's voice called out, quiet but clear. "Is anyone inside?" Vivienne did not answer. She held her breath. She could hear the rain on the man's coat, a different sound from the rain on the roof. She could smell the horse now, the warm animal smell of a well-kept beast in wet weather. She could smell leather and something else, something like wood smoke. The door of the carriage opened. Vivienne looked up. The man standing there was not what she had expected. He was tall, taller than the door frame, and he had to bend to look inside. His coat was dark and plain but well cut, the kind of coat a country gentleman might wear for a long ride. His boots were muddy to the knee. His hair was dark and wet and pushed back from his forehead. His face was not handsome in the way girls dreamed of. It was a face that had done things. His eyes were the color of a lake in November, a grey blue that did not seem to belong to any warm season. He looked at her. He did not look at her the way men usually looked at her. He looked at her the way one looks at a person, not the way one looks at a girl. "You are alone," he said. It was not a question. "The driver went for help," Vivienne said. Her voice was rougher than she meant it to be. She had practiced speaking with a country accent, softer at the vowels, and she used it now. "The wheel is stuck. He said he would come back." The man looked at the wheel, then at the sky, then at her again. "He has been gone for how long?" "Nearly an hour." The man was quiet. He was thinking. She could see him thinking. His face did not move much, but she could see it in his eyes. He was a man who thought before he spoke. "The road ahead is worse," he said. "There is a tree down across it about half a mile on. He will not come back today, not with anyone useful." "Oh," said Vivienne. She had not planned for this. She had planned for wet roads. She had not planned for a tree. "Where are you going?" he asked. She hesitated. But there was no reason to lie. "Ashcombe Manor. I have a position there. In the kitchen." Something changed in his face. It was a very small change. If she had not been watching him closely, she would not have seen it. His eyes narrowed a little. Then they went smooth again. "I am going that way myself," he said. "You may ride with me. It is not proper, I know. But you will freeze in this carriage tonight. With you? On the horse. It is only 3 miles by the field road. The manor will send someone for your trunk tomorrow." Vivienne looked at him. She had planned for many things. She had not planned for a strange man on a horse in the rain, offering her a ride to the very place she meant to arrive in secret. She could not refuse. If she refused, she would sit here until the driver came back with news that the road was blocked, and then she would have to walk, and she would arrive at the manor half dead and half frozen, and she would draw the very attention she wished to avoid. "Thank you," she said. She kept her country accent. She kept her eyes low. "I would be grateful." He offered her his hand. She took it. His hand was warm even through the leather of his glove. He lifted her down as if she weighed nothing. Her feet sank into the mud. He looked at her boots and frowned. "Those will not hold up," he said. "They are what I have." He said nothing to this. He led her to his horse, a tall dark bay with a white star on its forehead. He mounted first, quick and easy, and then he leaned down and lifted her up in front of him, sideways across the saddle. His arm went around her waist. She stiffened. She had never sat so close to a man in her life. She could feel the heat of his chest through his coat. She could smell rain and wood smoke, and something underneath that she could not name. Something like clean linen and cold stone, and the faint sharp smell of horse and man. "Hold on to the mane," he said. "It is not far." She held on. The horse moved forward into the rain. For a long time neither of them spoke. The horse's hooves squelched through mud. The rain grew softer. The sky was low and grey, and the fields on either side of the road were empty of everything but sheep and stone walls. Vivienne kept her eyes on the horse's ears. She could feel the man's breath just above her cap. She could feel his heartbeat where her shoulder pressed against his chest. Slow and steady, as if nothing about this was strange to him. "You are shivering," he said after a while. "I am well. You are shivering." He shifted, and she felt him unbutton his own coat and pull one side of it around her. The wool was warm from his body. It smelled of him. She should have refused. A scullery maid would have refused, perhaps, out of fear of being told she was above herself. But her teeth had started to click together, and pride was not going to keep her warm. "Thank you," she said. "What is your name?" She had prepared for this. "Vivi," she said. It was true enough. Her mother had called her that. "Vivi Bramble." "Bramble," he repeated. She could not tell if he believed her or not. And how did a girl with a name like Bramble come to be riding through the rain to Ashcombe Manor? My mother knew the housekeeper. "Mrs. Pellick. She wrote and said there was a place for me. And your mother?" "Dead these 10 years. I am sorry." She glanced up at him, despite herself. She had not expected that. Most gentlemen did not say sorry to a maid. Most gentlemen did not speak to a maid at all beyond an order. He was looking straight ahead over her cap, his face calm. She could not tell what he was. "And you, sir?" she asked. She thought she should ask. It would be strange not to ask. "What brings you to the manor?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Business," he said at last. "The Duke of Cranford is a friend. I am staying a few weeks. There is a matter he wishes my opinion on." "Oh," said Vivienne. She kept her face still. Her heart, though, gave one hard beat, and then another. A friend of the Duke of Cranford. Under the same roof. For weeks. This was worse than she had thought. She would have to be careful. She would have to be small. She would have to keep her cap low and her voice low, and her hands busy, and never let this man look at her too closely. She did not know yet that he had already looked at her more closely than she guessed. She did not know that the Duke of Cranford was not staying at Ashcombe Manor. She did not know that she was riding through the rain in the arms of the very man she had come here to test. Alistair Ravenhurst, Duke of Cranford, held the girl steady on the saddle in front of him, and thought that this was not the arrival he had planned. He had ridden ahead of his own household by 4 days. He had left his valet and his manservant and his heavy trunks in London. He had taken only his horse and a small saddle-bag, and the plain clothes he wore for country riding. He had come this way because he wished to see Ashcombe Manor before Ashcombe Manor saw him. He had wished to walk the fields where his bride had grown up, to speak to the villagers, to ask a few quiet questions in the taproom of the inn, and to form his own picture of the woman he was to marry. He had reason for this. His first betrothed, 7 years ago, had turned out to be a woman who wept prettily in his presence and struck her chambermaid across the face when she thought no one was watching. He had broken the engagement 3 days before the wedding. It had cost him a great deal. It had also cost him something in himself. He had promised then that he would never again marry blind. So, he had ridden out to sea, and on the road he had found a carriage stuck in the mud, and inside the carriage a girl with ash on her cheek, and boots too big for her feet, and eyes the colour of dark honey. And she had told him she was going to Ashcombe Manor to work in the kitchen. She was not a kitchen maid. He had known it in the first moment. Her hands were too clean under the dirt. Her back was too straight. She spoke with a country accent, but the accent slipped, at certain words, into something more careful. And her eyes, when she had looked up at him from the carriage floor, those were not the eyes of a girl who had grown up scrubbing pots. Those were the eyes of a girl who had grown up reading books. He had said nothing about any of this. He had lifted her onto his horse and put his coat around her, and he had watched her, quietly, as they rode. He was a patient man. He had learned to be. He had all the time in the world to find out who she was. They rode down into a small valley and up the other side. The rain slowed to a soft mist. Through the mist he could see the roof of Ashcombe Manor across the fields, a long, grey shape, with 3 chimneys smoking. He nudged the horse toward the servants' entrance at the back. He did not need to explain to her why. She had said she was a maid. He would treat her as she had asked to be treated. If she had lied, she would have to face the results of her lie. At the kitchen door, an old woman opened it before he had raised his hand. Mrs. Pellick had a face like a well-kept apple, small and round and lined with careful wrinkles. She took one look at the girl on the horse and one look at him, and something moved across her face that she smoothed away in a breath. "Sir," she said, dropping a curtsy. "This young woman was stranded on the road," Alisar said. "She says she is expected here." "Yes, sir, yes. We have been waiting for Vivi." "Come down, girl. Come inside. You are half drowned." He lifted the girl down. She stood a moment on unsteady feet, holding on to the saddle. Then she looked up at him. It was the first time she had looked at him full on, in the light of the kitchen doorway, without her head bent. Her eyes were dark honey, yes, but there was something behind them that made him understand he had been right to be careful. There was a mind there. There was a person watching him from behind that face, taking notes. "Thank you." "Sir," she said. Country accent, again. "Perfect, you are welcome, Vivi Bramble." He said her name slowly. He watched her face. She did not flinch, but something in her jaw tightened, just for a breath, and then relaxed. She had heard him hear it. She knew. She dropped a small curtsy, too neat for a scullery maid, but he did not point it out, and turned and went inside. "Mrs." Pellick looked at him. "Sir," said Mrs. Pellick, in a different voice than she had used before, "may I ask who I have the honour of receiving?" Alistair looked at her. He liked her face. It was the face of a woman who had kept secrets for a long time, and would keep this one too if he asked her. "A friend of the family," he said. "I am expected. But not until Friday. I have come early. My name will be given to you tomorrow. Tonight I would prefer to be a traveller who was caught in the rain." "Mrs." Pellick studied him. Then she nodded once, slowly. "There is a room in the west wing that is ready, sir. I will have Peggy light the fire. Will you take your supper in the small dining room?" I will. And the girl, sir?" He paused. "Treat her exactly as she has asked to be treated. Not one small kindness more. Not one small kindness less. Do you understand me, Mrs. Pellick?" Mrs. Pellick's mouth moved in something that was not quite a smile. "I understand you, sir." He handed his reins to a stable boy who had come running through the mud, and he walked into the house that was to become his by marriage in 3 weeks' time. He did not know yet that he had already made the most important decision of his life. He only knew that a girl with dark honey eyes and ash on her cheek was somewhere inside these walls, and that he intended, very quietly, to find out who she really was. That first night, Vivienne slept on a straw mattress in a small room above the kitchen with 2 other maids. One of them was a red-haired girl named Peggy, who talked in her sleep, and the other was a thin woman of 40 named Bess, who did not talk at all, awake or asleep. The room smelled of wood smoke from the kitchen chimney below, and of the tallow candles the maids used. The blanket was rough, the pillow was thin. Vivienne lay on her back and looked up at the low ceiling and listened to the house settle around her. She had done it. She was inside. Nobody had recognized her. Mrs. Pellick had greeted her with the kind of formal kindness she gave any new servant. No more, no less. The stranger on the horse was somewhere in the great house on the other side of a very long hallway, and would be gone in a few weeks. She had only to be careful. She lay there and thought about him. She did not want to. She had come here for a purpose, and that purpose had nothing to do with a stranger on a horse. But she thought of him anyway. She thought of the warmth of his coat around her shoulders. She thought of the way he had said Vivi Bramble, slowly, as if he were tasting the name to see if it was made of true wood or painted paper. She thought of the way he had looked at her, not at her face, not at her body, but at her, as if he were reading a page. She did not know his name. He had not given it. That, too, was strange. She rolled onto her side and shut her eyes and made herself think of other things. The Duke of Cranford. That was who she was here to see. She had never even seen a picture of him. She knew only that he was 31 years old, that he had inherited his title at 24, that he had never married, that he was said to be a serious man, and that her brother thought him rich. She would have to keep her eyes open. She would have to watch him when he came. She would have to see how he spoke to his servants, how he ate his meals, whether he laughed and at what. She would have to be Vivi Bramble, scullery maid, for 4 whole weeks. And then she would decide. She slept. In the morning, Mrs. Pellick set her to peeling turnips. It was cold in the kitchen despite the great fire. Her fingers went red and stiff. The smell of turnip and onion filled her nose. Peggy chattered beside her, telling her every rumor about every person in the house. Vivienne listened without seeming to listen. She learned that the master of the house, the young Duke, was expected on Friday. She learned that he had been to the manor only twice before, both times as a boy. She learned that he was said to be a difficult man, that he had broken an engagement once, years ago, and was said to be hard to please, that he had chosen not to bring his London staff, only a valet and a manservant, and that the household was in a state of quiet worry about it. She learned also that the stranger who had ridden in with her the day before had been given the best room in the West Wing, and that no one below stairs knew who he was. Peggy said he was a friend of the Duke's. Peggy said he had eyes like winter and a voice like a bell in a fog. He never smiled once, all through breakfast, Peggy whispered. Bess brought his coffee up herself, and she said he read a book the whole time and never looked at her. Perhaps the book was interesting, Vivienne said. Peggy giggled. Perhaps he does not know how to smile at all. Some gentlemen don't. Vivienne thought about that. She thought about the small movement of his mouth in the rain, when she had asked him what brought him to the manor. It had not been a smile. But it had not been nothing either. She was carrying a bucket of peels out to the yard when she saw him. He was in the stable court, in a plain riding coat, feeding an apple to a small brown pony. There was a boy beside him, the stable boy, 12 years old at most, thin as a whip. The boy was crying. Vivienne stopped in the doorway. She did not mean to watch. She stood with the bucket on her hip and she watched. The stranger was not scolding the boy. He was crouched down beside him, at the boy's eye level, and he was showing him something. His hands were steady. He was showing the boy how to hold his palm flat, so the pony would not nip his fingers when it took the apple. He was showing him how to speak quietly to a frightened horse. He was doing this in the yard, in the mud, on his knees in his good coat, and there was no one around to see, except a scullery maid he did not know was watching from the kitchen door. The boy tried it. The pony took the apple. The boy laughed through his tears. The stranger stood up. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder, not long, just a moment. Then he turned and led the pony back into the stable, and did not look back. Vivienne stood in the doorway with the bucket of peels growing heavy in her arms. She did not know what to do with what she had just seen. She could not add it to any picture she had of him yet. She did not know him well enough to know if this was normal for him or rare. She only knew that whatever kind of man he was, he had not done this for anyone's benefit. There had been no witness in his mind but the boy and the pony. He had done it because it needed doing. She carried the peels to the compost heap. She kept the picture in her mind. She meant to think about it later. She did not know that from the stable window, Alistair had watched her watch him. He had known she was there from the moment she stepped into the doorway. He had let her see, because he wanted her to see the boy. Not himself. The boy had been crying since dawn because his father, the head groom, had struck him for letting a horse throw a shoe. Alistair had already spoken to the head groom, quietly, in the tack room. It would not happen again. That was between him and the groom. What he had wanted the girl to see was a boy who could still learn something new, on a cold, wet morning, in a place where he had been shamed. He did not know why he had wanted her to see it. Only that he had. On the third day, he came into the kitchen. The kitchen was not a place for gentlemen. Everyone knew it. Mrs. Pellick was in the middle of scolding a fowl for being tough when the door from the passage opened and the stranger walked in, and every woman in the room stopped what she was doing and stood up straight. "Sir," said Mrs. Pellick, "I came for tea," he said. "The bell in the library is broken, and I did not wish to shout down the stairs. I will send Peggy up with a tray, sir. No need. I will take it here, if you will allow it. I have been indoors too long." Vivienne was at the long scrub table, with her sleeves rolled up and her hands in a bowl of cold water. She was cleaning parsley. She did not turn around. She kept her back to him, and her head bent. Her heart was going quickly. She heard him sit down at the small side table by the fire. She heard the scrape of the chair. She heard Mrs. Pellick clear her throat and send Peggy for the kettle. She heard the clink of cups. She heard him say, quietly, "Do not stop your work on my account, ladies. I am only here for a cup of tea." Vivienne did not stop. She washed the parsley and she chopped it fine on the board, and she kept her cap low and her face turned away, and she did not look at him once. But she felt him look at her. She felt it as one feels the sun through a curtain. She felt his eyes rest on her back for a long moment, and then move away, and then come back, and then move away again. He was doing it slowly, without any sign of hurry. He was doing it the way one looks at a page one is trying to memorize. Mrs. Pellick set his tea before him. He thanked her by name. He asked after her nephew who was down with a fever in the village. Mrs. Pellick answered with more warmth than a woman of her position was supposed to show a strange gentleman. Vivienne understood then that Mrs. Pellick knew who he was, and had known from the first night. She kept chopping. Her hands were steady. Her breath was not. "You there," he said. She did not turn. Peggy did. Bess did. Vivienne kept chopping. "You with the parsley." She turned. She kept her eyes on his boots. "Yes, sir, come here." She wiped her hands on her apron and walked around the table. She stopped at what she thought was a proper distance and dropped a small curtsy. She looked up only as far as his cravat. "Sir, I understand you came to us on Monday in some difficulty," he said. His voice was mild. He was sipping his tea. Mrs. Pellick had turned back to her fowl and was chopping with unusual enthusiasm. "Your trunk. Was it recovered?" "Yes, sir, Mrs. Pellick sent a boy on Tuesday. It came yesterday." "Good, and the boots?" She glanced down at her feet before she could stop herself. She had put on the good shoes Mrs. Pellick had lent her that morning. She had left the borrowed farmer's boots in the boot room to be cleaned. "They are drying, sir. They will not hold up in another rain. They are what I have, sir." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. She kept her eyes on his cravat. It was black silk. It was tied simply. There was a small line of embroidery along one edge that a servant had put there, and that a gentleman would not have chosen for himself. He had let his valet tie it. He was not vain. "Very well," he said. "You may go." She curtsied again. She went back to her parsley. Her heart was still going quickly. She did not know if she had passed his test or failed it. She did not even know what test it was. That night, after supper below stairs, Mrs. Pellick called her into the small room by the pantry where the housekeeper kept her accounts. She shut the door. "Sit down, girl," Vivienne sat. "Mrs. Pellick, hush. Listen. He knows you are not what you say." "Are you sure?" "He has said nothing. He has done nothing. But I have been in service 40 years. He knows." Vivienne put her hands flat on the table. "Will he say?" "Not yet. He has not said it to me, and he has not said it to you. He has decided to watch, is my guess. He is a watching kind of man." "Who is he?" Mrs. Pellick looked at her. It was a long, careful look. "You will find out at the proper time, and when you do, you will remember that I told you nothing. I was hired by your mother's cousin, and I owe your mother's daughter my honesty. But I was hired by his father's steward before that, and I owe him mine. So I will hold my tongue. But I will tell you this, Vivi. If you are here to test him, he is now testing you back. That is what he is doing. That is why he came into my kitchen for tea. That is why he asked after your boots. He is measuring you against a picture in his head, and you had best decide what picture you wish him to see." Vivienne did not sleep well that night either. The next morning, a pair of boots was left outside the maid's room. They were plain, black, sturdy, exactly her size. There was no note. Peggy picked them up and squealed and said someone had given her a present. Bess said in her dry voice that they were too small for Peggy and probably belonged to the new girl. Vivienne looked at the boots and then at Bess, who looked back at her with the flat, calm expression of a woman who had seen everything at least twice. "Take them," said Bess. "Or don't." But somebody paid for them. Vivienne took them. She did not thank him. She wore them the next day when she went to the well, and when she carried the eggs from the hen house, and when she scrubbed the front step because Peggy had a cold. She wore them, and she thought about him. He did not come to the kitchen again. But she saw him in the yard, walking with Mrs. Pellick, looking up at the roof where a slate had come loose. She saw him in the library window, reading. She saw him ride out one afternoon and come back late with his coat splashed to the shoulders. She saw him once at dusk, standing by the stone wall of the kitchen garden, alone, doing nothing, just looking at the sky. That last one she watched for a long time from the pantry window. He did not know she was there. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his head slightly back, and he watched the last light go out of the clouds, and she thought he looked like a man carrying something heavy that he was allowed, in that one small moment, to set down. On Friday, the Duke of Cranford was to arrive. Vivienne woke before dawn. She lay in the dark, listening to Peggy breathing on one side of her, and Bess breathing on the other, and the wind pushing at the shutters. She thought, Today I will see him. And she thought, also, of the stranger in the West Wing, and how he had said he was a friend of the Duke's, and how she had promised herself she would keep her eyes down when the Duke arrived, and how she would try to see the man she was to marry. The house was in a state of soft, busy hurry all morning. Peggy polished silver until her hands were black. Mrs. Pellick baked 3 loaves and killed a hen. Bess laid a fire in the great dining room. Vivienne scrubbed the front steps for the second time that week and swept the entrance hall and beat 2 rugs in the yard until her arms ached. The sky was grey, but not raining. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet leaves. At 3 in the afternoon, a carriage came up the drive. Vivienne, on her hands and knees in the great hall, polishing the last inch of floor near the front door, heard the wheels on the gravel. She heard Mrs. Pellick's quick step behind her. Up, girl, out of sight. Into the passage. Vivienne rose and went into the servants' passage, and stood with her back against the wall and her heart in her mouth. She could see through the crack of the door. She could see the front step. She could see the hall. The stranger came down the great staircase in a black coat. He was dressed as she had not seen him. Cravat white as new snow. Boots polished until they gave back the candlelight, his hair combed, his hands empty. He walked down the stairs the way a man walks who has been in that house all his life, though she knew he had not. He reached the bottom step as the front door opened. The butler, a man named Corvin, who had come with the stranger from London 3 days earlier, Vivienne had not known this, had assumed Corvin was of the manor, bowed low. Your Grace, welcome home. Vivienne felt the passage wall go cold behind her. The stranger, Alastair Ravenhurst, Duke of Cranford, did not turn around. He stood in the hall in his black coat and let the words settle over the household like snow. Thank you, Corvin, he said, and his voice was the same voice that had asked her, in the rain, whether she was cold. Vivienne's hand went to her mouth. She backed away from the crack in the door. She backed all the way down the passage to the kitchen. She sat down on a bench. Mrs. Pellick came in behind her and shut the door and stood looking at her with a face like a closed book. Sit still, girl. He is yes. He knew. From the beginning. He knew who I was. He knew you were not who you said. Whether he knew you were his bride, I cannot say. He must have. He must have. Then that is between him and you. Vivienne put her face in her hands. She was not crying. She was too full of something to cry. She was full of the memory of his arm around her waist in the rain, and the smell of his coat, and the boots outside her door, and the way he had looked at her in the kitchen when he asked about the parsley. He had known. He had been on his own errand of secret sight, the same as she had been. He had come early, dressed plain, to see the truth. He had found a girl in a stuck carriage in the mud, and he had lifted her up on his horse, and he had held her steady through 3 miles of rain, and all the while he had been reading her page by page. She did not know whether to be furious or ashamed. Both feelings arrived at once, and left her sitting on the bench with her hands over her mouth for a long time. Mrs. Pellick set a cup of tea in front of her. "Drink," Vivienne drank. Her hands were shaking. The tea was hot. It tasted of nothing. "I cannot stay," she said. "I cannot stay in this house another day. I must leave. I must leave before he calls for me. I cannot face him." "You can, and you will," said Mrs. Pellick, "because if you leave now, he will always be the man who beat you at your own game. And you, Vivi Ashcombe, are not a girl to be beaten at anything. Now finish your tea." Vivienne looked at her. "You knew who he was." "I knew from the moment he stood in my kitchen doorway." "Why did you not tell me?" "Because he asked me not to, and because I had promised you my honesty about who you were, not about who he was." "That is not honest." "It is exactly honest," said Mrs. Pellick, and for a moment her old face was hard as a stone. "I told you no lie. I told you to be careful. I told you he was measuring you. What more did you want, girl? A signed letter?" Vivienne looked at her cup. "No. Finish your tea, then wash your face and your hands. Then go and change into the clean dress I have laid out on your bed. Then come back down and wait in the small parlour. He will send for you before the sun sets. Of that I am sure." Vivienne finished her tea. Her hands did not stop shaking, but she made them do what she told them. She washed her face at the basin in the maid's room. She washed her hands. She took off the grey wool dress and put on the clean dark blue one Mrs. Pellick had left folded on her bed. She took the cap off her head. She combed her hair. She looked at herself in the small cracked glass on the wall. She was still dirty, in places she could not scrub off. She was still Vivienne Ashcombe. But she was not a scullery maid any more. The girl in the glass looked back at her with dark honey eyes, and the eyes were angry, and they were also afraid, and they were also something else. Something she did not have a word for yet. She sat in the small parlour for 2 hours. Mrs. Pellick had lit a fire. The room smelled of applewood smoke and the beeswax used on the little writing desk under the window. She could hear, faintly, the sound of voices from the great dining room where the Duke was taking his first meal in his own house. She could hear the clink of forks on china. She could hear a servant walking past the parlour door and pausing and going on. The window looked out on the west garden. The sky was going from grey to darker grey. A single blackbird sat on the low wall and sang once and then flew away. Vivienne kept her hands folded in her lap. She kept her back straight. She did not know if she was in trouble or not. She did not know what a duke did when he discovered his intended bride had come in disguise to spy on him. She did not know if she would be sent home in disgrace before nightfall. She thought about her brother. She thought about the letter he would write. She thought about the North Country and the governess plan. She thought about Mrs. Pellick saying, "You are not a girl to be beaten at anything." The door of the parlour opened. He came in alone. He shut the door behind him. He was still in the black coat and the white cravat. He looked at her across the small room, and she looked at him, and neither of them moved for a long moment. She stood up. She meant to curtsy. She did not. She stood with her hands at her sides, and she waited. He crossed the room slowly. He stopped at the fireplace. He put one hand on the mantel. He did not sit. He did not tell her to sit again. He looked at the fire for a breath, then he looked at her. "Miss Ashcombe, Your Grace." The words tasted strange in her mouth. "I owe you an apology," he said. She had not expected that. She had expected many things. She had not expected that. "You?" she said. "You owe me?" "I do." He turned to face her fully. His face was calm, but not cold. His eyes were the same November lake grey they had been in the rain. "I came here early," he said, in disguise, "because I did not trust the woman I was to marry to be what her family said she was. I have been deceived once before. I promised myself I would not be deceived again. So I came, dressed as a common traveller, to see for myself." "Yes," said Vivienne. She swallowed. "So did I." He looked at her. "I know. When did you know?" "That first day. In the carriage. Your hands were too clean. Your accent slipped on the word manor. You said it like a person who has known such a place, not like a person who has only heard the word. And you did not fear me. A scullery maid, alone with a strange man in the rain, would have feared me. You did not. You watched me. That is not the way a maid watches a gentleman. That is the way one gentleman watches another." Vivienne felt her face grow hot. She kept her chin up. "I see. I did not know you were my bride until the second day," he said. "Mrs. Pellick did not tell me. She has kept both our secrets, as far as she was able. On Tuesday morning I sent a rider to your brother's estate with a message that required an answer only my bride's brother could give. The rider came back on Thursday. Your brother had already had a letter from you, saying you had arrived safely at your aunt's in Bath. He was, he said, relieved he knew nothing. I wrote that letter before I left," Vivienne said. "So he would not worry. So he would not send men after you." "Yes," he nodded. He looked at her for another long moment. "You are angry," he said. "Yes, so am I. You have less right to be than I do." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was something like one. "That is true." He took a step away from the fireplace. He gestured to the chair she had been sitting in. "Please sit. I have things to say, and I would rather you were not standing to hear them." She sat. He drew up the other chair and sat opposite her. Not close. Just across. The fire was between them and to one side. She could see his face lit warm on one cheek and dim on the other. He put his hands on his knees. His hands were the same hands that had lifted her out of the carriage. She looked at them. "When I found you in the rain," he said, "I already suspected. When you told me you had a place at the manor, I was almost certain. I could have told you then who I was. I did not. I chose not to. That was my choice, and I own it. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I needed more time. But that is not the whole truth." He paused. She waited. "The whole truth," he said, "is that I wanted to see who you were when you did not know I was watching. Not the woman your brother described. Not the woman your father promised my father when we were both children. You, I wanted to see you." She did not speak. She kept her hands in her lap. "I have seen you now," he said. "For 4 days. I have seen how you speak to Peggy, who is silly, and to Bess, who is not. I have seen how you carry a bucket. I have seen how you watched me with the stable boy in the yard. I have seen how you did not thank me for the boots, because you understood that boots left outside a door with no name on them were not a thing to be thanked for. I have seen you sit at the pantry window at dusk and read a page of a book you had hidden in your apron pocket. I know which book. It is one I have read 3 times. Vivienne looked up. She could not help it. "Which book?" "Cowper's Poems. The old blue-bound copy from the parlour bookshelf. Peggy said you had taken it, because a page was folded at the corner, and Peggy noticed. She told me because she thought it was funny that a maid should like poems. I did not correct her." Vivienne felt something crack quietly in her chest. Not break, only crack, as thin ice cracks under a boot. She looked at him. He looked back at her. "You have seen me," she said. "What have you seen, Your Grace?" He was quiet for a long moment. She could hear the fire and the soft ticking of the mantel clock, and, very far off, The sound of Peggy laughing in the kitchen at something Bess had said. "I have seen a woman," he said, "who did not need me, who came here on her own errand at great cost to herself, because she would rather be a servant in a strange kitchen than a stranger in a strange bed. I have seen a woman who did not use her beauty to arrange her rescue, who did not weep prettily when I asked her name, who did not perform being cold when she was cold, who let me put my coat on her because she was practical, and thanked me once, and never mentioned it again. I have seen a woman who watched me feed an apple to a pony and understood that it had nothing to do with her. It had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with anyone. That is why it mattered that you saw it." She looked down at her hands. "I do not know what to do with any of this," she said. "Nor do I," he said. "But I will tell you what I have decided, if you will let me." "Tell me." He drew a breath. "I release you from the arrangement," he said. "The paper our fathers signed was a paper between two men who are dead. I do not consider it binding on either of us. If you wish to leave this house tomorrow morning, a carriage will be ready. I will settle a sum on you that will let you live as you choose. You may go to Bath. You may go to the North Country. You may open a school, if that would please you. You will be safe. You will be free. You will owe me nothing." Vivienne could not speak for a moment. "Why?" she said at last. "Because I would rather you chose me," he said, "than that you kept a promise your father made when you were 4 years old. And I would rather know now, before there are vows between us, whether you can choose me. If you cannot, I would rather let you go than hold you." The fire snapped. A log settled. She watched a small spray of sparks go up the chimney. "That is not," she said, "a small thing to offer. It is not meant as a small thing. You could be ruined by it. Your name." "My name," he said, "has been what people said of me for 8 years. It has never been what I wished it to be. If it must be ruined, let it be ruined for something honest." She looked at him. His face in the firelight was tired. She saw for the first time the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. She saw that he was not a man who had slept easily in the last week. She saw that he was afraid. He was afraid, and he was making her the offer anyway. "I have a condition," she said. He waited. "If I stay," she said, "if I choose to stay, I will not be a woman who is looked at. I will be a woman who is spoken to. I will manage this house. I will know its accounts. I will know its tenants. I will have my own hours in the library. I will not sit prettily in a chair while men decide things around me. My mother sat prettily in a chair for 18 years. I will not." "Yes," he said. "You have not thought about it." "I have thought about it since Tuesday. I decided on Wednesday. I have been waiting only for the right moment to say so." She stared at him. "I have a second condition. Yes, you will never lie to me again. Not by silence, not by disguise, not by omission. If you have a thought, you will say it. If you have a fear, you will name it. If you have deceived me before, you will confess it now, in this room, before the fire goes down. If you keep this condition, I will keep the other. If you do not, I will leave, and the sum you offered will be enough." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up. He walked to the desk under the window. He opened the drawer. He took out a folded piece of paper. He brought it back and put it in her hand. "This," he said, "is a letter I began to write to you the morning after we met. I did not send it. I could not. I have carried it in my coat since. Read it if you wish. When you are done, we will speak of anything else you would like to know. There is nothing I will not tell you." She unfolded it slowly. His hand was neat and small, and slanted slightly to the right. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. It was not a love letter. It was a plain, honest account of what he had suspected, what he had felt, and what he had decided to do about it. It ended with the words, "I do not know your name yet, but I know the shape of the person you are, and I am not sorry to have found her." She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her lap. She kept her hand on top of it. "There is something," she said. "One thing I must know." Yes, the stable boy. In the yard. What had happened to him? He had been crying since dawn. Mrs. Pellick told me. She said his father had struck him. Alastair's face did not change. But something moved behind his eyes. His father is the head groom. He struck the boy for letting a horse throw a shoe. I spoke to him. Quietly, in the tack room. It will not happen again. If it does, the head groom will lose his post. You did that on Monday. Yes, you did not tell me. No, you did not tell anyone. There was no reason to. It was between the head groom and me. She looked at him. You gave the boy the apple, so he would have something in his hand that was his own choice to give away. So he would feel he had power over something. Because he had had none that morning. Alastair's face changed. It was a small change, but she saw it. Yes, he said quietly. That was why. She put both her hands over the folded letter in her lap. She looked into the fire. The room smelled of applewood and beeswax, and, very faintly, of him. The same clean smell of linen and cold stone and rain that had been on his coat in the carriage. She could hear the mantel clock. She could hear her own breath. She could hear the small collapse of a log in the grate. "I will stay," she said. He did not move. He did not smile. He looked at her as if he were making very sure he had heard her right. "You are certain?" "I am not certain of very much," she said. "But I am certain enough for tonight. Ask me again tomorrow, and I will say the same." "I will," he said, "every day, if you wish it, until you tell me to stop." She stood up. He stood up. They stood a moment in the parlour with the fire between them. "I do not know what happens now," she said. "Now," he said, "we have supper, together, in the small dining room. There is a place set for you already. How did you know I would say yes?" "I did not. I told Mrs. Pellick to set the place anyway. In case." Something like a laugh came out of her. It surprised her. It surprised him. He did smile then, a real one, small and slow and not entirely under his control. It changed his face. She looked at him and thought, oh, so that is what he looks like when he is not being careful. He offered her his arm. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. Then she took it. They walked out of the parlour together, and down the long passage, and into the small dining room, where two places were set at one end of a long table. A single branch of candles burned in the middle. The room smelled of roasted fowl and rosemary and warm bread. Mrs. Pellick stood by the sideboard, with her hands folded. She saw them come in together. She did not smile, but her old face went soft in a way it had not gone in years, and she made her curtsy deeper than she needed to, and she went out of the room and shut the door, and did not come back until she was called. They ate. They spoke of small things at first. The weather, the state of the roof, the tenant farms. He asked her, at one point, what she had done in the 4 days when she had been Vivy Bramble, and she told him. The peels, the parsley, the stone step scrubbed twice, the pony in the yard. He listened. He did not interrupt. He asked her 1 or 2 questions. He did not laugh at her, though there were places in the story where a lesser man would have laughed. She asked him, in her turn, about the disguise, about why he had chosen the plain coat and the mud on his boots, about what he would have done if he had not liked what he found. "I would have gone home," he said, "and written your brother a letter, and paid the settlement and gone on. Would you have told me?" "No. I would have let you keep your dignity. That would have been the least I owed you, for wasting your name on the arrangement." That was kind. It was not kindness. It was decency. There is a difference. There is, she said. They did not stay long at table. Neither of them had much appetite. After the pudding, he walked her to the foot of the great staircase. Mrs. Pellick had prepared a room for her in the east wing. A real room, with a real bed. Peggy had already moved her small bundle up. At the bottom of the stairs, he stopped. "I would like," he said, "if you are willing, to walk in the garden with you tomorrow morning, before breakfast. There are things about this house I would like to show you. Things about myself I would like you to know. I would like that. 10 of the clock? 9, if you please. I have been rising at 5 all week. 10 will feel like noon." He did smile again then. It was still a small smile, but it was easier. It reached the corners of his eyes. 9 then. He did not kiss her hand. He did not touch her at all. He stood back from the bottom of the stairs and gave her a bow. She curtsied. Neither of them was in the mood for showing off. She went up the stairs alone. At the landing, she looked back once. He was still standing where she had left him, watching her go. He raised one hand, not a wave, just a small gesture, the barest lift of his fingers. She raised hers back. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of the great soft bed and looked at the small fire someone had laid there, and she began to cry. They were not sad tears. She did not know what they were. She let them come until they stopped, and then she washed her face and blew out the candle and lay in the bed and listened to the wind and the settling of the house, and after a long time she slept. She was up before 9. She wore the dark blue dress again, because it was the best she had brought, and her hair down her back in a plain braid, because she did not yet have a maid of her own, and did not know how to do anything more complicated. She came down to the front hall. He was already there, in his riding coat, his hat in his hand. He looked at her braid without commenting on it. He offered his arm. They walked out into the west garden. It was a cold, clear morning. The grass was silvered with frost. Their breath went out in white clouds. She could smell wet earth and cut apple wood from a pile by the shed. Somewhere across the field, a dog barked twice and stopped. He showed her the garden. Then he showed her the stone chapel where his grandmother was buried. Then he showed her a small clearing behind the chapel where a stone bench sat under a bare oak. "My mother liked this place," he said. "She used to come here when the house was too full. You loved her. Very much. She died when I was 15. I am sorry. So am I." They sat on the bench for a while. He did not speak. She did not either. The oak was bare above them. A single leaf, forgotten from last autumn, drifted down and landed on her sleeve. She looked at it. He looked at her looking at it. He did not brush it off. He waited to see if she would. She let it stay. He turned to her then. She turned to him. "Vivienne," he said. It was the first time he had said her real name. It sounded different in his mouth than her brother's mouth had ever made it sound. It sounded like a word he had learned carefully. "Yes, thank you," he said. "For staying. For last night. For the condition you set. For every one of it. You have not lost anything yet. I have gained something. That is what I meant." She looked at him. He was closer than he had been at any point since the carriage. She could see the small pale line of a scar above his left eyebrow that she had not seen before. She could see, at the corner of his mouth, the almost there movement of a smile that had not quite decided to appear. She could smell the same clean smell of him. Linen and rain and something like cold stone that had been kept in a warm hand. He did not kiss her. He took her hand instead, the ungloved one, which had been resting on the bench between them. He held it, palm up, and looked at it for a moment. Then he closed his own around it, slowly, so that the warmth of his hand met the cold of hers, and he did not let go. 9 of the clock tomorrow, he said. 9 of the clock tomorrow. They sat on the bench for a while longer. The single leaf stayed on her sleeve. The frost began to melt where the sun touched it. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. That was in the spring. By the summer, the arrangement had been quietly rewritten, and a letter to her brother that explained nothing and closed the matter. There were no vows in a chapel full of strangers. There was, instead, a small ceremony one morning in the stone chapel behind the house, with Mrs. Pellick as witness, and Peggy weeping into a cloth she had polished silver with the day before, and Bess standing dry-eyed at the back, with her hands folded and a look on her face that, for Bess, was almost a smile. Vivienne wore a dress of pale grey silk, with a piece of her mother's lace at the cuff. She did not wear a veil. She saw his face at every step down the short aisle, and he saw hers. By the autumn, the tenants had come to know her. She rode out with him twice a week. She learned the names of every child in the village. She learned the accounts. She sat in the library in her own hours, in the chair opposite his by the fire, with her own book, and neither of them spoke for great stretches of time, and neither of them wished to. Sometimes, without looking up from his book, he would put out a hand across the small table between them. Sometimes she would take it. Sometimes she would only rest her fingers on his for a moment, and go back to her page. Both were understood. A year later, almost to the day, on an evening in early spring, Vivienne sat in the small parlour, where he had first told her he released her from the arrangement. The fire was going. The mantel clock ticked. The room smelled of applewood and beeswax, and, faintly, of the roses Peggy had brought in that morning from the hothouse. Alistair came in with a book under his arm, and a cup of tea in his hand. He set the tea on the small table between the two chairs. He sat down in the chair opposite her. He opened his book. He did not speak. Vivienne looked up from her own book. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the girl who had sat in this same room a year ago, waiting to be summoned, and the man who had come in and offered her a way out. She thought about the letter he had put in her hand. She thought about the pony and the apple and the boots outside her door with no name on them. She reached across the small table. She did not take his hand. She took the letter he had carried in his coat that first week, the letter he had begun the morning after they met, the letter that ended with, "I know the shape of the person you are, and I am not sorry to have found her." She had kept it in her book. It lived there. She used it as her page mark. She held it a moment in her fingers. She set it down on the table between them, folded, the writing side up. He looked at it. He looked at her. He did not say anything. He only reached out and put his hand flat over the letter, so that his palm covered the words, and he left it there. She put her hand on top of his. The fire snapped once. The clock ticked. Somewhere in the great house, Peggy was singing to herself as she went down a passage with a basket of clean linens, and the sound came very faintly through 2 walls and a door, like the memory of a song rather than the song itself. He turned his hand under hers, palm up, and closed his fingers around her fingers, and did not let go. They sat that way for a long time, in the small parlour, with the letter between their palms and the fire going down, and neither of them read another page that night. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If this moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive.